Welcome to the Cafe Culture podcast, a season of discussions on culture, politics, philosophy and science.
The past, the present and the future of women in science.
Okay. So I'm going to speak mostly from the perspective of physics departments and the problems of getting women into physics. But I thought I would start off by addressing the comments of Sir Tim Hunt, Nobel laureate, because that's been so much in the media at the moment, and it seemed a little crazy to come and speak on this topic without mentioning that at all. So just in case you missed the entire thing somehow, Sir Tim Hunt said, in an attempt at humour, it should be noted, let me tell you about my trouble with girls. 3 things happen when they are in the lab. You fall in love with them, they fall in love with you, and when you criticise them, they cry. Now, a massive media storm followed this, which I would have to say I think was a little bit unjustified. But in some of the discussion that followed and the various sort of attempts at apology that occurred, he also made a further and I think more interesting comment, which was that he asked the question, does a lack of diversity in the scientific workplace actually matter? Some people just seem to think it's terribly important, but I'm not so sure. So I wanted to start off from that question to begin with, because without answering that question, it's not obvious why we're doing anything that we're trying to do here. So obviously, I would say the answer is yes. Diversity in the workplace, particularly in the scientific workplace, is incredibly important. And the reason for this is that science is an incredibly creative process. It's also a process about problem solving primarily. And if you are trying to solve a problem or create something, the last thing you really want to be doing is trying to do that by yourself. The next worst situation is to do it with a whole bunch of carbon copies of yourself, with the same training and expertise and opinions that you have. And the very best thing you can be doing is doing this in a diverse group, which will all bring different perspectives, different ideas, have different training and background. So the area of research that I'm in is incredibly interdisciplinary. So we bring ideas from biology, chemistry, engineering, and physics. And it's an absolutely wonderful environment to work in. And that's one form of valid, interesting diversity. But it's equally important to have the diverse opinions of men and women, and of course, different cultures as well. So of the other things that he said, I guess I would say that office romance may or may not be a problem, but it is certainly unfortunate to label this as a problem that is due to women. Okay, so one could equally have said the problem with men in a lab is that they fall in love, blah, blah, blah. So to label this as a problem of women invading a male space is where people have the issues with these comments. The other part about crying is, again, a little more difficult to address. So I think most of the people I work with would definitely label crying as unprofessional. So if I went into a committee meeting in my physics department and cried, there would definitely be some comment on this. However, what I would say is that crying is actually a very reasonable response to the stress and pressures of work, and particularly when you're receiving criticism. Unfortunately, it is a stereotypical female response to those stresses and pressures, and therefore tends to come away with a connotation of weakness, of being over-emotional, and perhaps even of being manipulative at the worst end of the spectrum. Stereotypically male responses that I tend to see day in, day out, are responding to the same stresses and pressures and anxieties, but are more aggressive. So I see quite a lot of shouting, a bit of name-calling, quite a lot of storming down the corridors, that kind of thing. And nobody is saying these things are acceptable at all. But in the ranking of unprofessional ways to behave, crying definitely wins the contest. And I think in reality, what we're seeing here is actually that the attitude of a workplace and environment to crying is perhaps just telling you not so much about professionalism, but it's an indicator of how integrated women are into that workplace. So are they accepted there as women, or are they tolerated so long as they behave like men? And I would say that I feel the environment I work in is rather more towards the latter than would be ideal. So as I said, I work in a physics department, and I've quite often forgotten that I'm a woman. So you can spend enough time in meetings with all men or discussing all things from that perspective that you sometimes forget that you're not actually part of that and you have something different to say. One way that we sort of parameterize what's going on in physics in general in terms of women is to look at what we refer to as the leaky pipeline. So this is how many women are coming into physics at various levels of their career and how many are left by the time you get to professor. So if I can just give you a few statistics on what the numbers of women in physics are, what we have is that about 22% of A-level students in physics are female. In the English system, obviously, this is the first time at which people get a choice, so there's not much data to say what people are interested in before that. But at A-level, it's 22%. This actually continues broadly, flatly through undergraduate, into the people doing PhDs, into people doing postdocs, and even now into becoming a lecturer. So it only falls off a little bit. When you look at the number of women, though, promoted to anything beyond the role of lecturer, it's dropped to 10% of people above that pay grade are women. If you look at professors, that's dropped down to 6%. These numbers have changed a little in the last 10 years, but it's only at the kind of 1 or 2% level. So what we have really is a picture where the main drop-off actually occurs at A-level. That's the point at which the biggest gender split happens. And after that, people continue more or less okay, but they are dropping off at the very highest levels. So the Institute of Physics did a report to try and investigate when it is that girls lose interest in physics as a subject. And again, it's not obvious from choices because they don't get any choice. But the picture is one that girls are interested in physics when they are leaving primary school, but by the time they have moved up to about the middle way through secondary school, that's when the interest level has really dropped away to what it is at A-level. So what they found is that girls on this will report that the reason they aren't interested in it is they don't see the relevance of it to them. So they don't see that physics is relevant in their lives. They have no hands-on experience of how things like classical mechanics or anything else might be relevant to real life. And that's important for girls when they're making decisions, perhaps more so than boys. They also feel that there's a strong association in physics with the ability to do it is strongly labelled as something that is to do with talent and brilliance and cleverness. Okay, not so much necessarily with other subjects. And girls tend to believe that they are not smart enough, not brilliant enough at physics to be successful at it. So that's what they're reporting when they're about 12, 13 years old. So, how is it and why do girls get the idea that physics isn't relevant for them and that they aren't good at it? So some personal experience of this, of having a daughter myself. She's only 4 at the moment, so I've only got that far through this process, but it's been fascinating to watch her build her construct of gender and identity and to see how she's learning about the world. I am totally doing experiments on my daughter. You just can't not as a scientist, I think. So what I noticed as she's been growing up is that after she was about 1.5 years old, she could start to point to someone in a room and say, that's a boy, that's a girl, accurately. And that was fine. By the time she was 2, she'd started to develop some sort of anxiety around the need to categorise people. So if there was, somebody it was not totally clear if it was boy or girl, this was a matter of consternation, and it was hard to get her to move past this before going and asking said person for their gender. By the time she hit about 2.5 years old, that's when she really actually strongly started to identify herself as a girl and to say that's what I am, which is the point at which we thought, the gender stereotyping may start to take hold. When she was 3 years old, I was reading her a book. It was the book of the movie Planes, which has an engineer in it called Dottie. And I read the relevant page, and she stopped me, and she said, no, you read that wrong, Mummy. Okay, well, what was wrong with it? Her name's not Dottie. Oh, okay, well, this is what it says on the page. I can't prove this because she can't read yet. But that is what it says. And she said, no, it's not Dottie, it must be Dot. Dottie is a girl's name, and girls can't be engineers. So I was completely taken aback by this, obviously, as she would be. And so I tried to explore with her this question, okay, so if girls can't be engineers, what can they do? And much to my horror, I discovered the entire, gender stereotyping of the real world was already, was already embedded in her worldview. So she could already tell me that, girls could be nurses and teachers and nursery workers and mums. Okay, but she was, boys could be astronauts and engineers and all of those kind of roles. And I was really surprised because my daughter her father is her primary carer, is a stay-at-home dad. And I am a professional physicist. So I was thinking, why on earth has she come out with this construct? So I started investigating what other messages she is receiving from the world around her. And I also started reading some research into these areas. So one obvious place of picking up bias is in parental expectations. And I sort of assumed we were doing a great job of showing her that, she could do anything she wanted and everything else. But in reality, if I compared her toy box to the stereotypical toy boxes of boys and girls, it was definitely feminine. Okay, so it didn't have as much trains, trucks, guns, that kind of thing in it, as you would expect for a male toy box at that age. And this reflects what research shows, which is that parents or nursery workers will persuade children to play with what they consider gender-appropriate toys, even to the point of overriding their preference. So if a girl will go and play with a train, they will actually on occasion take that away from them, give them a doll instead. It's also the case that parents underestimate girls' abilities all the way down from below 1 year old. So parents of boys tend to accurately estimate what their boys are capable of physically. Women, mums will underestimate how good the girls are at the same tasks by about 10%. So it's this inbuilt underestimate of what girls are capable of. I started to check through all of the books that we were reading to her as well. And in spite of this, the infamous Planes book containing an actual female mechanic, an engineer, she's now started to notice, aged 4, she was wondering the other day why only 2 out of all of the racing planes are girls. And she wondered aloud in my hearing whether it was just because girls weren't very good at doing races, so they were all too busy practicing to be allowed in the special race. It's a little bit heartbreaking to hear. We started looking at TV, so children's TV. And again, it's very biased. There are odd examples which are more neutral. In fact, they're probably more neutral. Kids' TV is probably more neutral than the books that we've been reading to her. But still not fantastic. And of course, in between TV programmes, you get adverts. Now, adverts are the absolute worst. So a snapshot of some adverts aimed at that kind of age group. You'll see adverts with boys in them, where the messages are, where they're playing with cars, they're constructing things, building racing tracks. Quite a lot of it is shooting each other with polystyrene darts of some description. But the strap lines are things like, be the best, who's got the power to win the race, things like that. They're interspersed with adverts with purely girls in them, and the topics of those are always role-playing things, or things based around friendship, so things where you can collect stuff and share stuff, things where you can play with a big plastic castle, which came with I think the most toxic message I saw in my little sampling, which was, everyone wants to look their best for the ball. Okay. So those are the messages that are telling girls and boys what it is they should be aspiring to. As they get older, obviously this goes into the full media, print media, and of course now the latest evil in the world, social media too. And all of the messages are similarly gender stereotyped. And in the end of the day, what we have told boys is that they can be interested in how things work, they can strive to be smart, successful and powerful. They can compete and win. What we've told girls is the primary importance in their lives is to be attractive. After that, they're allowed to have friends and practice their nurturing skills. So So I think it is very little surprise in reality, after 10 years of exposure to these messages or more, that aged 12 or 13, girls are starting to think that physics isn't relevant in their lives. They've been told continuously to care about other things. So of those women that I mentioned before, some fraction of them do go on and still continue to decide to be interested in physics. So is it that they are unaffected by these messages in some way? And the problem is, of course, that they're not. We're all affected by these messages in very similar ways. Now, how this manifests as people... I need to talk a lot faster. Great. How this manifests in people is in the form of unconscious bias. So if you ask me to make a conscious decision as to whether girls or boys are better at physics, I'll tell you it makes no difference. But these messages are embedded at a level that I can't access. I know somewhere deep in the depths of my brain that girls don't do physics and girls can't be mechanics. Ways in which this is manifest is in things like if you take a job application, so an identical job application, you put a female name at the top, a male name at the top, send it out to a whole bunch of different referees to comment on, it will come back that the female-labelled applicants were 10% less qualified on an identical application. This affects things, every aspect of academic life, essentially. So one thing we do is apply for jobs, clearly, and promotions. We also write papers and go and present at conferences. And it was shown that rating abstracts for papers, the same bias was present by gender. It's also been shown for various elements of applying for funding and grants as well. Finally, it turns up in teaching. So one element that we're also judged on in our professional career is teaching undergraduates. And again, it can be shown that the gender of the teacher will cause female teachers to be rated less good than male teachers. There is a more insidious problem, in fact, than being judged against different standards in this way, and that is that we judge ourselves on exactly the same basis. So what we find is that for female students sitting, for instance, a maths test, if they're asked to identify their gender first, they will do far less well on the test than if they're asked to identify their gender at the end. Okay, so just by making somebody sit a test, thinking about the fact they're in fact female, that will affect their performance in that test. It also manifests in a willingness to apply for jobs that you are actually qualified for, but you think you're not. So we identified a primary problem in getting women to get to higher rankings within university systems is that they simply won't apply. You ask them if they think they're qualified and they say no, whereas men with an equivalent set of qualifications would say yes. So, just to wrap up, what can we do to try and fix all of these issues? Well, there are certain fixes that we can put in place. So once you have acknowledged the existence of unconscious bias, you can try and rig your hiring procedures to mitigate for that bias, okay? So we're not saying hire the woman, we wouldn't say that, but what we're saying is put women on shortlists when you should get to meet them individually and you know their name, the unconscious bias ceases to play such a large role. We can headhunt women to get them to apply for jobs rather than waiting for them to apply for the same role. We can actually target them to apply. We can also make changes such as making promotions happen, application for promotion happen by default rather than by waiting for people to put themselves forward for application, for promotion. And all of this will definitely help, but in my mind it's a little bit of fiddling around the edges when the major problem is in the stereotyping by gender in our society. I think until society begins to address these underlying gender stereotypes, it will continue to be an extremely hard job to get the qualified, talented women that are out there into our science, technology and engineering aspects of work. Okay, thank you.
Welcome, Simi. Good evening, everyone. Thank you for the introduction, Pauline, and thank you for the invitation, Lauren. It's a pleasure to talk on this topic, which is really close to my heart. So the way I thought I'll structure my presentation is that I'll first give you a brief background about myself. why we need to retain women in science, and then I'll talk about the barriers which women have, well, the perceived barriers for the retention and progression of women in science. So I'm currently a professor of immunobiology at a medical school in Newcastle University. My interest is in examining the immunological processes which result in tissue damage and have an important role in solid organ transplantation. I'm very keen to help and provide support to our students and to develop their careers in science. And earlier on, I was a postgraduate coordinator, so I initiated career development workshops, and this was to engage our students at an early stage to develop their careers in science. And more recently, have been involved in the Athena Swan initiative for my institute. And this has been to help and support our researchers, both postdoctorals and lecturers. So one of the persistent problems is that a disproportionate amount of women qualified in science leave the profession. And this question about women in science, this debate has been going on for a long time, and there has been considerable investment, but we don't see any solution. And I think one of the issues is that women in science are not visible. So if I ask this audience, can you think of 5 famous Nobel Prize winners who are female? Can you name them for me? I thought Marie Curie would figure first. Any more? Sorry? Yes, Dorothy Hodgkins. Oh, we are doing well. Anyone else? Rosalind Franklin, yes. The work of Rosalind Franklin on her on the X-ray crystallography helped in James Watson and Crick to solve the DNA structure. Any more? And this is a very informed audience. I can see people here from the Institute with scientific backgrounds. And I think we've done very well because most of the people only come up with Marie Curie and don't go beyond it. So that has been a problem, and many efforts have been made to increase the number of women and girls studying science and technology, so STEM subjects, that's science, technology, engineering, and medicine. And there has been considerable success about women entering, so girls taking STEM subjects. So the statistics from 2010 shows that there has been a 13% increase in girls taking A levels in STEM subjects, and it's better in chemistry, which is 23%. But the problem is the retention of women in science. So the question is that, does it matter if UK is short of scientists? Does the government care? And it does indeed, because in a recent debate on science and an election, it was argued that the future of UK is in science. And I've got some statistics here. So in 2013 report, the STEM Human Capital Crunch estimated that UK has a shortfall in domestic supply of STEM workers by 40,000 per year. Another impressive statistics, the Women Business Council report suggests that by equalizing the labor force participation of men and women, UK can increase the GDP per capita by 10% by 2030. Also, the Society of Biology has recently stated that increasing women participation in the whole labor market could be worth between 15 and 23 billion. So there is a clear need for us to retain women in science. We already have a serious shortage of scientists and engineers, and unless progress is accelerated, the UK will not be able to meet the requirement for an estimated 1 million STEM professionals by 2020. And currently, including our own experience, the statistic says that 1 in 4 employer struggles to find a suitably qualified STEM employee. And the government has acknowledged that without recruiting more women into field and crucially training them, there is a real risk to the UK's economic long-term plan. So, if as a society we aim for equality in science and just leave the gender aside, we can start to even up the balance to benefit of both individual and businesses. And I'd like to draw on data from my own medical faculty. So what we see is that undergraduate applicants for both medicine and biomedical sciences, we have 55 to 56% female and 44% male. At the PhD level, the parity is still in favor of women. It's 53% females, 47% male. But then when you look at my level, that's professorial levels, we are still 13% female and 87% male. And the data of within different institutes in medical faculty, this might vary between 13 and 20%. And it is in line with the national data. So the question is, why do women exit from the STEM workforce? Our own survey plus questionnaires and case studies shows there are two important issues among various others. One is the work-life balance, which is usually not conducive with careers in research. And second is that there is not access to strong professional networks. So it is not a genetic disposition or lack of interest, because if that was the case, our female students and researchers would not be performing as well as they do. So in terms of, for example, degree classification, our female students outperform men. They have better attitude towards education. And, So the problem is the way the STEM careers are structured. And the way it works is that most of the postgraduate students spend the first few years of their careers in various short-term contracts. And this means that they have to relocate to different institutions, industry, or even different country. And this is not conducive for a family life. And in case of women, there is a biological clock, so you can't keep marriage and children on hold till you have established careers. So this places a considerable strain on family life for scientists of both genders, but more so women, because they are the primary carers of children. And also, the way academic life is structured, an ideal worker is one who either does not have children, or if he has children, there's someone else to take care of them. So it means that they can concentrate on their research in the evening or on the weekends. And those who do not conform to this model are thus at a disadvantage when it comes to productivity. And it is not always women who face this difficulty, but women are more likely to find themselves in the position to juggle work and family life. Another thing during my role as the Athena Swan lead, I have found that we do not support a female academics optimally following maternity leave, and we have done things now to address this. But during maternity leave, there's inevitable impact on their publications, on their grant income, and all these are metrics which are involved in retention and promotion. Also, the academic roles are often gendered. Women are more likely to be employed part-time or in teaching roles, and they usually, well, in some cases, they're also involved in more institutional housekeeping roles, like pastoral or sitting on committees. And these are not valued roles from institution point of view, in terms of that they are not awarded with promotion as opposed to more prestigious research roles. I should point out that Newcastle University's Vice Chancellor, Professor Brink, has really has taken admirable initiative for promotions, and there is parity between teaching and research. So the other source which has been identified, which has been involved in losing women or the attrition rate, is the lack of networks and mentoring. So research has shown that women have problems gaining access to the strong male networks. And this can be due to time constraints, those with children responsibilities, and they might not be able to socialize in out-of-hour activities. And this might mean that they are less, they're not invited to collaborate, or they're not involved in informal decision making. Then there is a matter of discrimination, and an example of that is, which has been discussed very nicely by Elizabeth, by our Nobel laureate Tim Hunt. And I suppose another thing I want to talk about is the role models. And whether we like it or not, we are a product of our environment and our upbringing. And we do identify with people, we look upon role models, people we can identify with. And the Royal Society of Chemistry has shown in their recent survey that there is a serious lack of credible role models. And the chemistry students said that the careers in research are not for them because consciously or unconsciously they cannot identify with any of the role models. So I would also like to take this opportunity to bring a bit of personal perspective. So do I get treated differently? I'm a bit more established now, but I can think of examples earlier on in my career. For example, I was invited to be an external examiner for an MD student at Edinburgh University. And I was in communication with the internal examiner. But when I turned up, he was very surprised to see me. He said, Dr. Ali, he just assumed it was a male. And not only in this country, my paper was shortlisted for presentation at an American conference. And the person didn't know me, so I was introduced by the chair as a he. So you can see there is that unconscious bias, that people just assume that you will be male. But the important thing is that it should not affect people's confidence and maybe make us more determined to succeed. But there is definitely a change in culture because a lot of universities are taking gender inequalities very seriously. And Athena Swan Charter, which is run by Equality Challenge Unit, is one of the key force. So it was launched in 2005, and the main aim of this charter is that to recognize the commitment of institutions to address gender inequalities, to tackle the unequal representation of women in science, and to improve career progression of female academics. So far, 129 universities have signed up to the charter, and Newcastle University is one amongst them. And we have got a bronze award, which was awarded initially in 2009 and has been renewed in 2012. And our Vice Chancellor has aspirations that we will be going for silver by the end of this year. So in order to be awarded the bronze award, Newcastle University had to collect data on their workforce, they had to identify barriers by women, and they had to formulate an action plan to overcome them. I have been involved in Athena Swan activity at the institute level. So I chair the monthly meetings. We invite staff and students to discuss issues. And we were awarded the Silver Award in 2013. And I do think this is an important achievement for the Institute, as it means that we are committed and are striving equal opportunities for all. So initially, signing up to the charter was on the voluntary basis, but in 2011, Department of Health, the Chief Medical Officer, Dame Sally Davis, she announced that from 2015, if medical schools want access to the NIHR funding, they had to have Silver Award. And this led to a frenzy of activity at the Athena Swan headquarters. The number of applications have trebled. And the resulting increase in the number of institutions signing up to the charter and gaining awards, I think it's a great news for gender equality in science. As part of this initiative in my institute, what we have done is we recognize the importance in developing the next generation of scientists and are involved in a number of outreach activities, including school management days and events. We offer mentoring scheme to lecturers and postdoctoral researchers. We offer career development guidance to our PhD students. And then there are surveys both for researchers and our students, which help us to identify not only our areas of strength, but also our areas of weaknesses. And as an example of improvement in the culture, when we analyzed the data within our institute, we found that in terms of promotion, women lag 5 years behind men. And the reason is women wait longer to apply for promotion compared to men. So what we have done now is that during the professional development review, which is annually, the reviewer and head of institute try and identify people who are at the right stage for promotion, and they support the application. People whose CV is not strong enough, they are allocated a mentor who helps them address the weaknesses, and at the faculty level there is a promotion workshop. So the system is not perfect, and some people are concerned that because there is that money now which is driving Athena Swan Award, so are the institutes doing it for the right reason, for the change of culture, or is money the driving force? But what we have to all agree is that it's in everyone's interest that we encourage women to enter science, and we also help retain our women in science. I firmly believe that if as a nation we want to maintain a competitive edge in global and clinical biological research, we cannot afford to allow 50% of our workforce to underperform due to circumstances. And we must encourage our young researchers to develop as leaders of future. Hence, I think I'm in a very good place at the university I'm at, that we are all committed to help tackle this unequal representation of women in science and improve their career progression. And thank you all for your attention.
Cafe Culture North East is supported by Newcastle University, Peels and the British Science Association. We're also supported by Ginger's Cafe in Dance City, who host the events.